Hi, this is Eric from Cafe Watercolor. Thank you for joining me in this new painting video. Today we're going to take a look at this painting that I did of a figure in action. Now, sport is not a usual theme that I work with, but I really enjoy painting this one and I quite like the result. So I'm very excited to share this with you. Just like any other painting, a drawing is very important, especially for figure, because we're looking at human beings every day. So if the proportion is off, if it doesn't look right, something will be off and people won't be able to tell that. So what I usually like to do when painting a figure, when drawing a figure, is to capture the gesture first. To capture gesture is basically capturing the movement and the balance of the figure. So figure out the longest line of the figure. So in this case, it's the head to the feet. She is sort of jumping actually. So it'll be a little bit unbalanced because she's actually in the middle of an action as opposed to standing straight. After capturing the gesture, we will start to get into a little bit more technical and start to work on the structure. So you can see that her body is sort of like a box shape. That's because I want to figure out the perspective and the structure of the body. I need to know what the solid form is. So just to simplify her body into the most basic primitive, which is a box. Now after I get the basic structure down, I will start to articulate and define the figure a little bit more. So just to articulate her arm and the curve of her body a little bit more, her face, putting the feature in. Since this is a whole figure painting, the face, I'm not going to put too much emphasis on it. And you might also notice that I changed her face a little bit. The face in the original photo feels a little bit too intense. So even though I want to capture the energy, I don't want to make her face a little bit too intense. So I'm erasing some of the construction lines because I get the pretty good feel of the form. So here I am trying to do the hand. Hand is gripping the racket. So this photo is actually Maria Sharapova. I think everybody knows her as far as tennis player goes. I happened to come across this photo on Instagram and I really like the lighting of the photo actually. So I saw this might be a really good photo to work with. So I decided to paint this. Even though I painted some figure painting before, but never a figure in action like this. So this is a very interesting and fun experience. And I actually hope I will do more in the future. So I'm really trying to get the face right. So I erase it and I kind of redo it again. And you start to notice that I actually start to put some what I call anchor point, which is some darker mark all over the body. So places like joint and places that we would consider landmark, I put a little bit more emphasis on it. I try to indicate the folds. Those folds are really complicated. I kind of realized that when I was drawing, so I try to put just a little bit more detail on the folds of her clothes. And now you can see that I'm trying to articulate her leg just a little bit. One thing I really want to capture in this painting is to really capture the force, really capture the dynamic of her movement. So the muscles and the curve of the leg, those are very important. And now I'm starting the first wash. So it's very important that I have a nice clean first wash. This painting I actually use Fabriano paper, which is a paper that I rarely use. Fabriano paper is very delicate, I feel, so when the paint go on there, it moves quite a bit and it doesn't really take a lot of water that well. So I am a little bit of struggling and try to get used to the property of the paper in the first wash. And I try my best not to overdo anything. And the first wash of the figure, It's just to establish some basic warm and cool. I'm not really painting the value. I do give a little bit more emphasis on the places that I feel matter. So you can see that I have a little bit more red tint in the elbow area and the hand area. Those are also the area where I put the anchor points when I was drawing. So those are a really important area that sort of define the figure and also define her movement and the gesture. So I'm trying to finish up the skin area first. So the face and the arm, the hand, and now onto the leg. So I started with her knee and outward because her knee is one of this anchor point as well. So I try to start there and put just a little bit more emphasis on it. I try to give it a tiny little bit of value, but I don't really emphasize too much on it. I can go back with another wash later. Her right leg is in the shadow, so it's a lot cooler, especially on the top. So I make sure I get that in when I was painting the first wash. Now I'm painting her body. She's wearing white and is catching quite a bit of sunlight, so I actually give her a little bit of warm color on it. Very faint, warm light. And onto her chest and her stomach where the shadow is casting. So I also give it a little bit hints of value. But more importantly, the shadow are very cool under the sunlight. Usually during a sunny day, the shadow is usually very cool because of the ambient light. And especially in this case, she is actually standing in a very blue court. So imagine the bright sunlight hitting the blue court and bounce off a lot of blue light on her. So that's why the shadow areas are so blue. Now I'm painting the second wash. The first wash is completely dry. And I decided to just really simplify her face. So you don't see her eyes and stuff because it's all covered in the shadow. And I try to connect the shape of the shadow into one single shape. All I really need to do is to leave the highlight on the nose and the cheek and a little bit on the chin. So really looking at the photo, and even though I make her mouth close, the lighting still look very similar. It's very important to try to simplify the value as much as possible so that it's very easy to read. The shadow is casting from her hat. That's why most of the shadow on her face is actually pretty sharp. But now you can see that once I put the shadow on her face, the form's starting to pop. And I also starting to paint the shadow that's casting from her head onto her shoulder and a little bit of her chest. And I try to make some warm and cool color, wet onto wet, while I'm painting the shadow. I'm really trying to push the color in this one to make it more lively. And here I try to soften the shadow of her head because I don't want a very hard line, and I actually want that shadow kind of mix into the background. This stage requires a lot of face because I just started to do the second wash. The form just taking place, and I need a lot of face to just believe that it will turn out good. Watercolor is something that you never really know how it's going to turn out. You can kind of predict it, and as you work more with watercolor, the more familiar you are with the medium. It's kind of like a relationship, but still, at the same time, you're never going to know how it's going to look like exactly. Students often afraid of mistakes so much. They try to make things correct by building a form with tiny little brushstroke and try to fill it in like a coloring book because they're afraid of mistake. But doing so will actually make the painting look very dead. And sometimes it's that confidence, bold, big brushstroke that has more energy and more freshness than trying to build up your painting with tiny little brushstroke and a lot of dabbings. Here I'm moving on to her chest. So you can see that I connect the shadow of her arm to her armpit to the bottom of her chest because I really want to connect the shape as much as possible. And here I soften the shadow on her chest because it's a transition from light to dark because of the form of her chest. And now I paint a little bit of the form shadow. That will make the form pops out a little bit more. And I remember to go back and soften it with a nice clean damp brush. And here's the little Nike sign on her shirt. It's pretty fun. Now move on to her shoulder. So her shoulder, I think, is a little bit semi-translucent in the fabric, so you see a little bit of skin tone. So that's why I put some really faint skin color on it. So my palette is actually very simple. For the skin tone, it's mostly cadmium red and cadmium orange. And if I want it to be darker, I add a little bit of burnt sienna, yellow ochre, and things like that. If I want a cool color, I usually go to cerulean blue. If I really want some really hot and dark color, I add some alizarin crimson. Here I paint the hand. I also changed the gesture of her hand a little bit. Her hand was open wide, but I feel that looks a little bit odd in the painting, so I have her finger kind of naturally curled up just a little bit more. So underneath her chest, now I'm painting her waist. Again, warm and cool, play with the color as much as possible. As long as the value is correct, it will never really look that odd. And if you really look at the photo, I am actually not really inventing the color. I'm just trying to pick out the warm and cool that I see and try to exaggerate them just a little bit to make them feel more alive. And now comes the part with that very complicated fold. I'm definitely not able to copy it one-to-one, but I try to indicate them a lot with some visual languages. Some fold within the fold will have a little bit darker shadow, and it will have a mixture of hard and soft edge, and the shape will follow the form, or the folds will follow the form of her body and her thigh. So if you able to reproduce some of those hard and soft edge, the flow of the folds, and the value, you'll be able to paint a very nice and convincing fabrics, even with a lot of fold like this. And you don't have to copy it one-to-one. As long as you understand what you're painting, you can pretty much make a very believable painting. So the understanding of form and lighting is more important than anything else in this case. And it's very important that I try to finish all the folds and the shadow in one go, so all the shadow shape connects together. I dab out some of the paint because it's a little bit too much. I want to reveal a little bit more light. And here I paint the shadow again on her right leg. Again, it's behind the shadow, is under the shadow. So I try to make it very simple. To make it simple like this will also help the other leg to pop out a little bit more, just to give a little bit of interesting sort of aerial perspective. Because it's a figure, the distance between legs is not going to be that much. So any treatment you can do to make it look a little bit deeper will always be good. And now I move on to paint her left leg, which is out in the sun. And here's a very important thing. Her skirt is casting a shadow on her thigh. And the shadow is following the form of her thigh. So that's why you see the shadow kind of curve down like that, kind of wrapping around her thigh. So that little shadow really helped to define the lighting and the form on her thigh. So it started to look very solid and three-dimensional. And now I paint some warmer colored and a little bit of form shadow down to her knee and from her knee to her leg. And before it's dry, I remember to soften some of the edge. The soft edge is usually light transition into dark because the form is round, as opposed to a cast shadow which is always sharp. Here I really make the knee red and I really make it look a lot hotter. It's probably not that red in the photo, but with that hot spot there, the knee all of a sudden looks really pops out. And that just gives a lot more weight and dynamic to her movement. It really helps to anchor down her leg. I'm trying to finishing up her right leg. The shoe is almost all in the shadow with a little bit of highlights on the side. Also a little bit of indication on her left shoes. So in this stage, I have a lot more confidence because the whole painting is starting to look pretty good and solid. I'm starting to paint some cast shadow. The whole figure is casting a shadow on the ground, so I want to paint that in. Also splash the water a little bit, get a little bit of looseness in the background, just to make things look a little bit more dynamic and loose. I'm not painting a photoreal painting. What I really want to do is to capture her movement and just capture the gesture of this rally. Now I go back to the top and finish up her head by just putting in some hair. The hair is really simple, but I'm really making sure that I get some nice dry brush stroke there. Her hair is kind of floating because she's jumping. So to really get some nice dry brush stroke that conveys some speed and movement is very important. And just like the shadow of the head, I actually merge her hair into the background as well. So this kind of helps to give an illusion that a part of her is in the background and a part of her is popping out. That just adds some more depth. Here is pretty much just all detail work at this point. So a little bit more details on the hat to get a little bit more form going. And try to define the hand a little bit, and now I start to paint the racket. It is an important part because she is playing tennis, so I need to paint the racket. Now in the photo you see every single string on the racket, and that's not something I'm going to do. So what I do is I draw some line, but I start to soften them with a little bit of water, some random wetness. And I actually bring out some of the value and make some sort of this movement stroke. So that kind of helps to define her movement a little bit. I really like that tennis ball, so I decided to paint that in. It's small, but I still have light and shadow, so just to get that in, and the ball looks solid and looks three-dimensional. And now with some of the areas drying, I can start to give it just a little bit more punches. Some very dark shadow here and there. A little bit of detail, and that's about it. And now I'm trying to just paint some background as well. I keep the background light with pretty much just blue. But you can see that I paint the background so that I can define her silhouette a little bit more. I'm not painting the background everywhere, just places that I think it makes sense. The background is very kind of rough looking as well because I really want to convey the energy, the dynamic of her movement and the subject. and we are finished. I really enjoy this painting and I really like how it turns out. I hope you like that too. Thank you so much for watching. And I hope you enjoyed this video. If you like what I do, if you like this video, please like and subscribe. And do leave a comment, let me know what other type of figure in action would you like to see me paint. If you haven't, visit my website and download the free PDF guide. And I will see you guys again pretty soon.